Kia ora. Kia ora koe. E hono re he karorea, e mangarongo ki te matou te whenua, te whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for coming out on a warm day in what we've been calling Mandy, because it's a little bit like a tropical South Pacific paradise as you dodge the rainstorms. I wanted to thank those who've made this event possible, Jackie, Raywin and the whole Sargent team, and also the Whanganui Regional Museum staff. And it's great to be with so many of the supporters of this project over the last 18 years. And I'm particularly chuffed that Bill Milbank's here, because Bill was one of the first people I met the first time I came to Whanganui. And also acknowledge members of the Mackay and Crestwell families who I've been catching up with over the weekend, and my family and friends and people who've come from Wellington and other places. So I thought what I'd do today, this is a unique opportunity for me because you know, you are a self-selected naked nerd audience. I can kind of assume you know the basics and you've got an interest in the story. So I thought, well, I'd share with you some of the steps in the research journey here in London and in Berlin. And then I thought I'd just list for you the mysteries and unanswered questions, because that's the trouble with this story, is that anyone who gets interested in it, you know, thinks, oh my goodness, the mayor shot someone, you know, how did that happen? Well, you pretty quickly run into these brick walls or these just gaps in the story, and you just don't really know what happened. And I'll show you how some of the creative responses have sort of dealt with that issue. So, you might have seen this photo already. This is me looking for bullet holes, photograph taken by Lee Mitchell in the Meteor building. And as far as we can tell, that's Mackey's former office and where this incident happened. When I was in Berlin, a woman that I met said to me, oh, what you're doing is a thing called a Spurensuche. It's when there's a crime and they look for traces of the crime, that's what they call it. It's a forensic examination. But she said it has a metaphorical meaning, a search for traces in history. So I love that metaphor, and it's about trying to get underneath or beyond the story of the shootings. And here's my partner, Richard King, at one of our visits to Whanganui, and I was really chuffed when this Spurensuche idea was referenced in this Simplegma, if I say it right, a collaborative project between the Auckland-based artist Shannon Novak and the curator Lily Mitchellangen for Pride Week 2021. And they'd come across this idea and they'd heard me talking about the research. And they said searching for queerness in collections despite historical erasure and exclusion is like sifting through coded traces. And I thought it was wonderful that, you know, other curators and artists were taking up that idea. Taken together, I'm arguing that these traces are evidence of homosexuality as these men understood it in their own times. This illustrates what the historian Justin Bengry calls queering the past. And he said, to queer the past is to let people in history define themselves in often complex and unfamiliar ways, or to accept that even if they did define themselves, we may never know how. It is a conversation between us and them about the resonances we may feel with their lives, without demanding from them a direct line of kinship and exclusive ownership. Queering the past is an act that happens in the present. And I really like that idea, and it's kind of what I was struggling with. And it helps you get over that idea of, well, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence they were gay or, you know, homosexual as we know it? You don't actually have to if you're thinking of it that way. You're allowing them to exist in their own context, which I think is what history and historians should do. So even if it is uncertain what homosexuality meant to Mackay and Crestwell, we do know that this part of their lives impacted on how others treated them. Now here's someone, this is Prue Langbein at the launch in Wellington this week. And some of you here, I know Bill met Prue when she first came here, and others may have met her that first time we came here in 2004. And Prue came up with this idea because she said, why don't we do a radio program? Because we were both working at Radio New Zealand doing features. I was doing Māori features, she was doing children's programs and drama. That she'd come across the story in the Michael King History of New Zealand. I'd come across it in a book by Peter Wells, a collection of gay writing. But we didn't finish the story, the program before I left radio. But Prue had conversations with Mackey's daughter, Josephine Duncan, which was really, really significant. And also, Prue wrote some notes straight away from that conversation. And Josephine wasn't very happy about us doing this. But not out of a sense of shame. We got a strong sense it was out of protectiveness for her father. There was an oral history that Michelle Horwood did in 1983, so we both went and listened to that, and then we went to the archives, because Wanganui's archives come to Wellington. So there was lots and lots of material. We found Charles Mackay's inmate file, we found the divorce file, the trial file, the insolvency file, lots of material. But we didn't have anyone to talk to, because Josephine said, well, I was just a child. And there was really no one around by then who would have been an adult at that time. So we were a little bit stuck. We had all this sort of historical material. So this is who we were looking for. I mean, you're probably familiar with these photos. Darcy Cresswell and Charles Mackay. I thought I'd show you some new images that just popped up relatively recently, but we had enough time to put them in the book. The Wellington College archive told me they had this one. So I don't know if you can spot Mackay. There's a different version of the photo. This is him here. Yeah, it's quite a surprise, but when you, so that's a close-up. Interesting, when you look at it here, but if you look at his prison photo, you can kind of see that it is him. And then this one just popped up the other day. Mackay being the Commodore of this Wanganui Sailing Club in 1904. That was from the New Zealand Graphic. So, moving on to the Black Whale shooting. One of the key questions is, how did Cresswell know Mackay was homosexual? So, you'll see, this is to certify that some 6 years ago, Charles Evan Mackay, a Wanganui solicitor, consulted me with reference to homosexual monomania. I advised him to obtain seductive treatment, and I believe that he acted on this. That's Dr. Earl in Wickstead Street. And Dr. Earl apparently referred Mackay to a metaphysician who had been a taxi driver, but he was a wrestling coach, I think. But he set himself up in Wickstead Street. I actually talked to his granddaughter, and she said that he couldn't afford to be a doctor. Training cost too much, so he did this other sort of therapy. He was in charge of one of the districts in Wanganui during the 1918 flu epidemic. So it makes you realise how medical history is not straightforward, and the whole line between conventional and unconventional medicine is quite blurry. This is to certify that Mr. C.E. Mackay in August 1914, acting on the advice of his medical advisor, came to see me about treating me for obsessions of homosexual nature. He was, in a way, a very worried and depressed frame of mind, and said that if I could not help him, life would be impossible. He had treatments intermittently until the end of November 1914. He then stopped the treatments because he said the homosexual ideas were gone and he felt quite all right again. In my opinion, intermittent treatments should have been kept up for 12 to 18 months, and then the cure would have been permanent. I have treated other cases of homosexual desire with success. The two chief causes of relapse are alcoholism and neurasthenia. For the last few months, we know Mr. C.E. Mackay has had great mental strain and worry, and I'm sure if this had not been so, this would never have come to pass. So it looks like the treatment was a thing called autosuggestion, possibly hypnosis. This man was using hypnosis, but he was also using this thing called suggestive therapy, and it's not like training the will, it's about training the mind. And they still use it for stopping smoking and things like that. But I actually did find the book that Mackay was probably using, and Blanche Bourne, who Carol Michael, who's here, has just written a biography of, was writing to the prisoners about this book. I think she might have lent it to them, so she was kind of involved in this as well. But Lynn Jenner, who was one of the readers of my draft, said to me, that's 6 years. It's 1914, and then 6 years. So the whole time he would have thought, well, who else might have known that? And it would have been very stressful to think that someone else might have known that he'd had that treatment. And why did he have the treatment? Was it his wife who gave him an ultimatum, or did he do it off his own bat? It is kind of, Bronwyn Labram last night talked about modernity, and it is kind of amazing that in Wanganui, you could trot off to Wickstead Street, Harley Street of Wanganui, and go and get these treatments for all these things. It's kind of interesting that that was an option. As opposed to, say, going to your priest, or that sort of spiritual guidance, which he might have done as well, I don't know. So, yeah, who else knew about the treatment? And then that other big question, why did Cresswell decide to blackmail Mackay? And who was Cresswell's cousin, this cousin that introduced Cresswell to the mayor, and what did he have to do with the blackmail? And apologies for this, it's not a very good photo. I was doing this in a hurry at work. So this is Roland Marshall Cresswell, and who I think was probably the cousin. Eldest son of Charles Cresswell and Eleanor Cresswell. So served in the Great War, and that family had lost a son, Jack Tennyson Cresswell, at Passchendaele. And this man ended up having to take over the farm that was meant for Jack. And I don't know if you heard Greg say last night, that just heartbreaking quote from Eleanor Cresswell, people ask me why I wear black, or from 1917 the colour went out, and just this scrapbook that's just this searing portrait of grief, and that family, was almost destroyed. They left Wanganui, which is why I had a bit of trouble working out where they were. They went to Auckland. And I did track down a grandson of him, and he said he remembered, I think the farm was in the Parapara somewhere in there, and he remembered these adults talking, and they didn't realise the kids were listening. And it's in the book that, there were these watery shell holes that he was hiding in, and there were dead bodies in there, and just this, and it just, things like that would really mark you. So, but I don't know that necessarily Roland was necessarily the person. I'm not exactly sure how he was involved, but I think there are other possibilities. People might have seen this book, Mates and Lovers. This was a history of homosexuality that came out a few years ago by Chris Brickle, who's a professor at Otago University in sociology and gender studies. And that's based on a photo of two men in Wanganui in 1888, and at the Turnbull where I work, and it says full-length seated portrait of two men, Mr. Colley and Mr. Green, or possibly Green, with a golden Labrador dog between them. And Chris has sort of posed the possibility of, perhaps there was a relationship between these two men, and that he acknowledges it's ultimately a bit ambiguous. But gay theatre people have, there's been two adaptations of the book, and both of them included Mackay and Cresswell. And, had been having sex and when they met, and I mean, one of them, I think, because you might know that Cresswell either accidentally or deliberately was gas poisoning in London, and it has Mackay giving Cresswell the 50p pieces to gas himself. But I think these interpretations kind of say more about the people doing the interpretations. But it's interesting that gay people who've looked at the story have kind of assumed that perhaps there was some sort of relationship and a homosexual encounter between these two men. But I was really surprised when I found this. So this is from the Patia paper, June 1920. So the shooting was in May 1920. So the next door town, Waverley and Patia. So they're saying that this past week we've had those trials. There was this other one, Dennis Gunn, that was a really sensational case in Ponsonby. There is one aspect of the Wanganui sensation that the public should not overlook, and that is the service rendered to the community by the young man Cresswell, who courageously took it upon himself to remove a deadly cancerous growth that had unhappily taken root in the neighbouring town. There were probably others that knew of the existence of the evil in their midst, and the part played by the chief actor who is now paying the penalty, but not having the proofs that the young Cresswell apparently had to be content with a vigorous and unrelenting campaign of hostility towards the culprit in the hope that he would take a hint and retire from public life. Instead of doing so, he brazened things out until the crash came, and the campaign of righteous hostility was for a long time regarded by many as a persecution. They are wiser now. Everything somehow comes to those who wait and those who fight in a good cause. One word before the curtain is rained down forever, and let us hope on an unpleasing episode, if there are any further signs of the cancerous growth in Wanganui, it is to be hoped the police will get to work and root it out completely. So what are they talking about? That's not kind of, some sort of random encounter between two men. There's this idea that there was something going on, and it chimed with these other references and interviews and hearsay and things, that there was perhaps something going on with a group of men. as well as other than Mackay, you know, and that Mackay took the rap for it. Then there's also a New Zealand Times article, which I haven't got, but I didn't realise Cresswell was still in hospital here for a few months afterwards, recovering. And the story said, it is understood that, you know, other things have been discovered by Cresswell, and certain people in Whanganui have shaken the dust off their feet. So that's that biblical quote about you're either getting out before you get caught, or you're getting out because you're outraged by what's happening. And that got printed all over New Zealand. So it's all sort of circumstantial, but it's why I sort of think perhaps it wasn't necessarily what some of the, you know, the gay playwrights and things have assumed. I think there might have been more to it, and it would explain to me why the town would kind of desperately try and put a lid on this and suppress it as it sort of did right from when it happened. There's a reference in a letter to this woman, Helen Shaw, who got very interested in Darcy Cresswell, and she wanted to do Cresswell's biography, and she wrote to Charles Carrington, who was at school with Cresswell, and he said all he could remember Cresswell saying about it, there was a young friend of his called Ronnie who'd fallen into the clutches of the net. And in the Cresswell family, Roland was known as Ronald. And I thought, here's the going. Yeah. But I'm not sure that's right, because Cresswell's best friend at school was called Ronald Cuthbert. And Helen Shaw, in her papers at Turnbull, got really interested in Ronald Cuthbert, and she was writing to him, and even after his death was trying to work out his background of his career as a lawyer. And he was in Christchurch, and I thought, how did that work? How could Mackay be having some sort of relationship with someone in Christchurch? But then I saw all these articles of Mackay getting criticised for not being in Whanganui and gallivanting around the country. And so I thought, well, maybe it's not inconceivable, so that Cresswell was trying to save his friend. Helen Shaw wrote to Bill Mitchell. They may not be here today, but Bill Mitchell's family were there last night. Alison Morrison is Bill Mitchell's daughter. And Bill was the other person Prue and I were following, because he'd been to Whanganui and tried to talk to people and follow this story. He never finished his book. But he wrote to her, and then she said, any additional information I might offer could be mere speculation or at best unproven. I think one has to concentrate on what one knows beyond shadow of doubt. So I thought it was interesting that she was saying that. Now, this is this crazy, Ronald Cuthbert in 1966 was at, he was at Penrith in the hospital there, and I think he was very sick. And this is a letter that's at Turnbull, and he says, so this is, I don't even know if I've completely deciphered it right, but he says, could you send me a copy of the newspaper account, best of all a newspaper cutting, telling about the Whanganui murder as narrated before I think Robert Stout. Darcy on one occasion did tell me at some length of that incident, but before writing about what Darcy told me, I would like to at least read the Press Association account of what happened. Failing that, perhaps you can mention what you yourself have already learnt in its source and give me particulars of the press accounts of the trial. Which I think still leaves open the possibility that he did know. And you know, in 1966, there was no papers passed. It was actually quite hard to figure out things like newspaper articles and stuff. Helen Shaw didn't even know what year the shooting had happened until she wrote to the town clerk here in 1966. But Cuthbert died on the 5th of May 1967, and that's the last piece of correspondence in the file. So, is it a conspiracy or is it a cock-up, as the people say? As I was telling people on the tour, as I've looked over time at this photo of Massey in Whanganui in 1919 at the centre, Charles Mackay beside him, and then the man beside him is Thomas Boswell Williams. And I started to sort of notice his name popping up. He was an auctioneer in Whanganui, a lot older than Mackay, and he took over as Mackay in the 2 years when Mackay retired. That was 13 to 15, and he also chaired the campaigns for the people that were trying to get rid of Mackay in the elections before that. And then he's the one that took over in 1920. And he had a go at Mackay in the newspaper saying, when Mackay enlisted, and Massey sent him a telegram, but then Mackay didn't go to service, that it was a sham. He said, I'm opposed to shams. And then Mackay then couldn't help himself and had a go about how useless he thought Williams was. But then I just think the body language, I might be reading more into this, but I just think the body language was really interesting. Williams doesn't really seem to be liking sitting next to Mackay. So not necessarily a smoking gun or anything, but I do wonder about Williams. Wanganui invited the Williams family back when the Duckwood Street Bridge had its centenary a few years ago, and they live in Fielding. This is the thing, the people aren't necessarily in Wanganui any longer, the families are in different places. Why did Mackay have two offices? So his official office, and all the street directories was here, in this building, which was a billiard hall. And you'll know that's the patch when it was the fire in the 90s, and there's a park there now. That's the avenue at the end there. And so the actual office was in that other building, in the Meteor building. Sorry, the shooting happened in this other building, and it's never really been explained why there was this other office. But one of the important bits of evidence about it being in that building is this is the layout of the office that Darcy Cresswell drew from his hospital wing. And if you're at all familiar with that tea room, the Meteor tea room, that's the layout. So where it says A, that there's no wall there anymore. That's the door that Mackay went through and either locked or held after he shot Cresswell, and Cresswell got up again with the gun. You see the two windows are marked, and probably that's the staircase to the left, and there are in that room doors to the outside there, and there's that door on an angle at the top. And the other piece of evidence is that they said it's directly opposite the library, which is that theatre, which was the library. So it has to have been in that building. But I'd love to know why Digan, whose building that was letting Mackay use that building as an office. It was designed for, they had strong room and they had solicitors' offices and things. Digan, Bill told me, was involved with the sergeant, I think, as an honorary curator, I think. So, they would have had that shared interest. But that one is a little bit of a mystery. Here's the inmate file. It was amazing to find. I remember when Prue and I found this, and it was only by accident. Someone at Archives told us about it. It was on a card index, and she said to us, "Oh, I think we've got this, and you need to apply for access," and we did. But there were letters. There was about 20 letters in the file that were censored but kept in file, which were extraordinary. A real gift in terms of hearing his voice. Now I'm going to share with you my speculation, and no one really agrees with me, but I'm going to try with this Mackay nerdy audience. So people will know of these memories of old Wanganui books that are fantastic, that H&A Print do, and they get people giving them photos, they have their own photos. I think Kelvin Adam and those guys, and there's this photo, and I think Kelvin is a car person too. So this is this man getting into a Studebaker. I think it's a 1920 Studebaker, which is significant. And I thought, I wonder if that's Mackay, because Mackay was brought back from Mount Eden prison to sort out his business, winding up the business, because it was apparently a mess, and he was declared insolvent. And there's a reference in the file from the official assignee saying, "I have been to see Mrs. Mackay, Mrs. Duncan, and she does not want him back in Wanganui." But they still did bring him back because otherwise they'd have had to take the case to Auckland, but all the records and things were here, and all the creditors were here. So that is not Mackay, that man standing up. But what I realised is if you look in that photo, everybody else in that photo, except for the chauffeur, is looking somewhere else. They're looking at can you see? Just behind the chauffeur's head. There's someone else who's about to get in the car.
Yeah.
And Judge Don. Well, and I think, and you'll know who that is, that's Foster's, the Foster's Hotel at the bottom of the, but I do wonder if that was him. No one agrees with me. But it could be, because it is it's a 1920s Studebaker, and those guys look like detectives, or tips they were prison guards, and there is a policeman there as well. But anyway, that's.
He's got a badge on his sleeve, and the earlobe.
It's the earlobe, isn't it? He had quite distinctive earlobes. Yeah. So that one's that's for the next book. So Anne Shelton is one of the photographers that I've collaborated with, and Greg mentioned this. This is Bill, Desbo, Anne and me toasting Mackie. It was Anne's idea just before the Gilbert Stone was unveiled as a result of that project from her residency here. Another one of the unanswered questions is why Mackie was sent to New Plymouth Prison. Because New Plymouth Prison was set aside as a prison for homosexual men. Well, homosexual meant, you know, all the sex offenders were regarded as sex offenders, and they were all grouped together because a classification system was introduced for prisons. So all the old men, I think, came to Wanganui. They were starting to have Borstalls. That was a women's prison. You know, and Auckland, I think, was for serious offenders, and they decided to put all the homosexual men in New Plymouth. So that's from about 1914 till the mid-50s. And, you know, Mackie had shot someone. It was attempted murder. It's kind of really strange that he got sent here and was working in the quarry. I mean, the whole story of that was quite funny. Apparently they had really good concerts. And then they realised it probably wasn't such a good idea to have all the gay men together. So they stopped. That's a photo that Anne took of one of the cell blocks. There's two cell blocks, and when that prison closed, we went there with Lee Mitchellane in the week it had closed. And I was really keen to go there because it hadn't really been altered, and it had the smallest prison cells in use. So you really could get a sense of how miserable it was being there. I just added this in this morning because I thought it would be good for you to see, as we sort of move on to London, Mackie's sister. And you can really see the likeness there. This is the staff of the Taranaki Herald up in New Plymouth. And there she is at the centre, and she worked for the Herald for a long time. She's the one who took Mackie to London, and I think he got out of prison early in 1926 because she and his other siblings sponsored him to go. She took him to London, she set him up in a business which we now know was advertising, which would have been quite a modish, trendy thing to be doing. So obviously he couldn't practice as a lawyer. So once she'd gone back though, he's in, you know, this is Trafalgar Square, you probably might remember that, you know, that fountain. I don't know if that's one of the embassies, isn't it, behind them. But this was taken by a man called Montague Glover, a gay man who photographed gay men in London. And it's supposed to be one of the earliest photos of men cruising in London that exists before the 19th. And I probably don't need to spell out to you why you can tell that it's a photo of men cruising. You can see the detail, especially on the man on the right. So Mackie was working in a place called Adelphi, which is just behind where they are, I think. It's between the Savoy Hotel and Charing Cross, that sort of part of London. Living in Bloomsbury at the same time as Francis Hodgkins, which was really interesting. He apparently loved going to St James's Park. Hector Balafo, who knew him, talked about this, and that he went there almost every evening and would send gay little postcards about them. I didn't sort of tweak until I sort of thought about it. It was years later I realised, hang on a minute, you don't go to St James's Park to get a photo of Buckingham Palace at night. And it was a major, I went to St James's Park to have a look and summon up Mackie's ghost, and then I got followed by a man. It was Mackay. It's been a cruising area since the 1700s, I think, St James's Park. So it was very exciting to get this will. So I found this in Berlin.